everybody, I'm Beebs Kelley. Welcome back to the final episode in the Oprah Interview series. If you missed the breakdown of each segment of the Oprah Interview, I will link the playlist for you here. This has been so severely banned from being heard or seen or viewed ever again. Many of you think that it had to do with legal repercussions, that they were simply afraid to be sued for defamation because so much of what they said could potentially warrant lawsuits. But there was a lot of other elements to it that didn't do the Sussexes or Oprah any favors. Oprah lost a lot of her credibility. Now, she was not ever like a super well-respected journalist. She got her start, or like really rose to fame, doing daytime talk TV. So not discrediting her success at all. It's just, we're not talking about somebody who had a career in journalism and investigative journalism and interviewing people trying to find truth. It was much more about how things felt, what sorts of juicy things have happened to you and how you got through it. Human interest sort of stories that don't really necessarily require hunting down facts, verifying facts, things of that nature. That's all I'm saying. So Oprah didn't necessarily have the approach of a responsible journalist, in part because she isn't a responsible journalist. That's not her vibe. That's not her forte. However, a lot of people think that's where she got herself into trouble on this interview, because certain questions that required follow-up or accusations that really demanded more evidence and more questions to verify the validity simply didn't get that follow-up and that attention that they needed, and may have contributed to potential lawsuit risk, and that might have contributed to it being scrubbed. But regardless of that, a lot of people lost what respect they had for Oprah with this interview because of the irresponsible way she conducted it. That said, it was Harry and Meghan who chose to say such things. They are the biggest problems of the Oprah interview. They're the ones who lied, misled people, exaggerated things, said things that weren't exactly true, or took things out of context, or contradicted their own other statements that they have made at times. So Harry and Meghan really tarnished their image in a major way with the Oprah interview. Not just their credibility, which was already on shaky ground, but also just general questions about their character, judgment as human beings doing something like this. Why go on TV and say things that could even be interpreted as, that even run the risk of being interpreted as, so incredibly petty, like what she did with the Catherine story?
They go on the record and negate the most ridiculous story for anyone, right? I'm talking about things that are super artificial and inconsequential. But the narrative about, making Kate cry, I think, was the beginning of a real character assassination.
Or what Harry did by saying his family cut him off financially.
My family literally cut me off financially.
Your family cut you off?
Yeah. In the first quarter of 2020. Yeah.
Or things that could be so easily proven as lies. Why would you go on TV and say things basically accusing people, a whole group of people, a whole country of people, all kinds of people, of racism or other serious accusations, like not letting you get help while you're pregnant, stuff like that? Why would you go on TV and accuse people of those things without any evidence or proof at all, knowing in the back of your mind that there are entirely different versions of this story that can be easily disputed, that Meghan's claims have been fervently disputed? A lot of people question their judgment for putting themselves in this position to have so many falsehoods and exaggerations out there from their own mouths, that people have endlessly found contradictions, lies, exaggerations, and disputed their version of events.
Watch The Crown. Do you all watch The Crown?
I've watched some of it. You've watched some of it?
I've watched some of it. But
why do that to yourself? The easiest answer is, of course, that Harry and Meghan both are higher on the scales of narcissistic traits, that they possess more narcissistic traits in greater doses than average. The reason why this is the easiest explanation for this huge mistake of the Oprah interview is because of a few reasons. Those who are higher in narcissism tend to think automatically that people will believe them no matter what and lack the perception to see the consequences of saying things that are not 100% true and carefully chosen and backed up by fact and evidence if need be. These types of people are much more comfortable with exaggerating or lying whenever it serves them. And they do it so frequently that they almost notice it less. They almost don't even realize they're doing it some of the time because it's so natural to them. They do it so often that it doesn't stand out as much. And this is just part of their MO. If it serves them, they will enhance a story to make it more juicy and exciting for the listener. Even if someone else in the room is sitting there watching them enhance this story and make it sound more spectacular or exciting or dramatic than it is, and they know that this person is embellishing their story. The narcissistic type of person will continue on embellishing a story and think nothing of how it makes them look.
How to cross your legs, how to be royal. There's none of that training. That might exist for other members of the family. That was not something that was offered to me.
So nobody tells you anything?
No.
Nobody prepares you?
No, I mean, but even down, but even down to like the national anthem. It's amazing how they can use Meg for everything.
Stories that you...
And they also, like I said, lack that awareness to understand how it will be received by others, in part because they just automatically assume everyone will believe everything they say. So the consequences of these exaggerations and lies don't really stand out to them. It's not until much, much later that those consequences are coming at them that they're like, oh, well, that's not nice. And even then, they'll deflect blame to some other place. Another reason why this makes sense is because of the lack of compassion for others, lack of ability to put yourself in other people's shoes. Now, those higher in narcissism are not completely unable to do this. A lot of the times they can if they really try, but it's not as automatic. They lack that compassion or ability to where they won't have a filter to what they're saying. They won't stop themselves or think before they say things that could have a negative consequence for someone else. So long as it doesn't necessarily have a negative consequence for themselves, they'll have no problem saying such things. But when it has a negative consequence for someone else, most of us kind of have what is easy to think of as a filter, that we won't say this because it could hurt that person's feelings or put that person in an awkward situation where it wouldn't be polite for that person. That filter stops us from saying lots and lots of things. People higher in narcissism lack that filter much of the time. Additionally, it can make it difficult to see any sort of a negative perception of what you're saying. People who are higher in narcissistic traits tend to be very self-absorbed. They are fully immersed in whatever their version of events is and believe the way that they say it and whatnot will be wholeheartedly agreed, and everybody will be so fully on their page, seeing everything the exact way that they see it. Their worldview doesn't have room to consider that what they're saying or accusing people of or arguing is petty and small. Harry and Meghan both made a lot of petty accusations and dipped their toes into a lot of petty gossip or petty issues that made them look very, very small. I've said it before, and it's worth repeating. If these sorts of things are the problems Harry and Meghan have had that are such big problems they need to repeatedly revisit them, then their lives are really, really good. If the biggest problems they have, the biggest fish to fry, those scabs that they'll keep picking at are things like somebody crying before a wedding, disagreements over flower girl dresses, being cut off financially in your mid to late 30s. These are small problems. And so it makes them look incredibly small to be hashing them out on TV, to dip their toes into the drama over who made who cry or exaggerate stories makes them look petty. But Harry and Meghan were unable to have that foresight to understand that these paths of conversation will make them look petty and lose them vast amounts of popularity. They weren't able to foresee that. That is another reason why this sort of higher in narcissistic traits, you could say, you can't really fully say narcissists or people with NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, because narcissism is on that sliding scale. And so even without a diagnosis of problematic NPD, people can still have a lot of problems cropping up in their lives just from being high in certain narcissistic traits. And so the tongue twister that it is, that phrase is the most accurate to describe what's happening here. But people who have those sorts of traits like Harry and Meghan in this context, were unable to see potential consequences for their relationships and their situation in relation to the royal family in the long run, inhibiting any opportunities for rejoining should they later decide. Burning all those bridges was not something that likely crossed their mind, because they assumed, once again, that everybody would just fully be on their page and see everything through their eyes, which also made them blind to how petty and small they would look and how poorly everything would be received. It also showed a lack of foresight and a lack of integrity overall, especially in making certain accusations without having any evidence to back it up. So all of this combined together can be neatly tied up in a bow by saying they're so high in narcissism that they did this interview and it was a complete and utter train wreck and had no concept of how it would be received by real people in real life. Very, very out of touch, the Sussexes are. The consequences completely absent from their mind, including the consequences to their own image. But as I said, this also drew into question their judgment in general and invited scrutiny forevermore. It set a really, really bad tone for Harry and Meghan moving forward. Because their complaints were so small and petty, people lost respect for them instantly. Because they didn't justify such serious claims and exaggerated things and blew everything out of proportion, they built an image for themselves as whiny, overreactive, overly sensitive, out of touch, not socially capable. Initially, many journalists found 17 flat-out lies, things that were plainly false, said by them. And that number grew to over 30 the following year and after several other analyses. If you include all the statements that have since been disputed by other parties, exaggerations, lies by omission, regular lies, and other inconsistencies, that number rises, which we outlined in the previous episodes. It really is a bad look, especially for people who dare discuss misinformation as a cultural concern, much like their hypocritical environmentalism talking points while simultaneously racking up a larger carbon footprint than most people do in an entire lifetime. All in all, this Oprah interview made them look really, really bad. And it wasn't so much that the valid points that they had or the more benign elements of the interview were ignored, but rather everything else was so glaringly horrible. Bad idea, poorly received, just all in all, tragic in terms of PR, that's what really mattered and outshone anything else that could have been considered just a normal run-of-the-mill interview. It was a huge misstep also because at the time, Prince Philip, it was bad timing. He had gone in hospital and passed away shortly thereafter. Queen Elizabeth was grieving during this time. And of course, Queen Elizabeth, one of the most beloved figures of all time, was targeted in this. Her institution, ultimately, her institution was what Harry and Meghan were attacking, one in which she was in charge of. And to attack it with no evidence or proof, and often, as we have seen, lies, etc., simply made Harry and Meghan look cruel. But beyond all of that, this really did feel a lot like a play-by-play of justifying why they were so difficult when they were with the royal family, why they caused such a big stink on their way out, and why they chose to leave in the first place. So many points of the interview seemed to be specifically selected to sort of answer back to certain articles or statements or beef that they had with people, certain headlines in particular, or even, as we discussed, justifications for their actions. Harry and Meghan suffered poor press because of their own actions. Very early on, when Harry got with Meghan and they were just dating, it was released and the statement was released to announce this relationship to the public in a really premature fashion. We have since learned that Meghan forced Harry's hand in announcing that she was his girlfriend and then proceeded to give several magazine interviews, making her look hungry for media attention. Also behind the scenes, she was calling paparazzi, telling them where she would be at various points in time, and calling in restaurants or hotels, demanding special treatment because she was Harry's girlfriend. Another element to this that made it pretty weird was that Harry had just broken up with his longtime girlfriend shortly beforehand, and that lends itself better context to why his family may have thought he was rushing things a bit. Shortly after leaving a long-term relationship with someone, jumping into things so quickly with someone new is a normal concern for anybody. Following that sort of prickly statement Harry put out, telling people to leave his girlfriend alone when she was already being left alone and was seeking out media attention and giving interviews, gave a bad tone from the beginning. And since then, many of the critical articles and press coverage was directly connected to bad behavior of Harry and Meghan themselves. Poor choices, ill-advised moves like statements like that continued on, unprofessional behavior, unpolished presentations, and more. It's evidenced through this entire saga. It did a lot more to stir the pot and stir up drama and create problems out of nothing than they did just doing good work. And this is something that people have noticed and has been very, very present in the Harry and Meghan story from the beginning. And that is another reason why people just simply don't receive Harry and Meghan's assertions that they just want to do good very well at all. It really doesn't seem that way. When they spend a lot more of their energy and airtime talking about their grievances, complaining about things, and being generally uncooperative, then that doesn't really seem like their priority is to do good. If it was, they would spend more of their airtime and much more of their time focused on initiatives and spreading positive messages, working smarter within those philanthropic fields. Since they don't, people don't believe that they're actually after that at all. And their actions leading up to this interview and in this interview demonstrate that very well. As Meghan called it, their cause-driven work, it was not mentioned in this interview at all. This interview was very much focused on Meghan's complaints that were not valid. Many people, myself included, got the impression that this Oprah interview was meant to force the hand of the monarchy into reopening discussions and giving them their half-in, half-out desired option. This was part 2 of the bluff that was Megxit. Harry and Meghan revealed and then pivoted away and asked Oprah to edit out their revelation that they had been discussing a different arrangement with the royal family for 2 years before Megxit was announced. That means sometime in 2018, they began talking with the family about doing things at a more part-time way. Given that they were not very clear and not on the same page about exactly what they wanted and how they wanted it to be, I could imagine the royal family was equally in the dark about what Harry and Meghan's actual motivations and desires were. However, there is a high likelihood that Harry and Meghan simply didn't want to not be senior working royals. Just like in all jobs and organizations, there are only certain positions that need to be filled. You can't just create your own. Harry and Meghan were invited to be senior working members of the royal family. That is a very prominent position and comes with lots and lots of perks and publicity. They were given a beautiful home and a remodel paid for completely. That was millions of dollars. Meghan was given a huge wardrobe allowance. They were invited to glitzy and glamorous events and given patronages that seemed to align with their personal interests. However, Harry and Meghan did not seem to want to do the daily work and grind that came with the position. Instead, they wanted to be free to be able to make monetary deals, make money outside of that, while also working for the Queen. Mayhaps they were told that if that's the route you want to go, you cannot live on palace grounds. You have to be just a member of the family, not a working member. That comes with a whole entire different dynamic that Harry and Meghan did not like the sounds of. Meghan essentially tried to reference lots of other members of the royal family, and she claimed they live on palace grounds, earn a living, and represent the Queen when called upon. There isn't really any members of the royal family that fit that bill exactly. Prince Andrew, for example, and Fergie live on palace grounds, but they're not called upon to represent King Charles. Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice don't have full-time residences on palace grounds, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. And they earn a living, and they're not exactly called upon to represent the king so much as join as family members in a more casual sort of a setting, like garden parties, for example. And they both have patronages independent of royal business that are their own. Harry and Meghan seemed to want something a little bit different, more of the perks, while having a sort of similar situation to these other family members. And that was evidently denied. Additionally, they were causing so much trouble that there was constant need for course correction with Harry and Meghan, both from a PR perspective and likely in internal discussions. And it's clear that Megxit was a sort of temper tantrum attempt to force the monarchy to just give them what they want already. Kind of like, well, I mean business. I'm going to do this whether you let me or not, and you can figure it out on the back end. So when that didn't work out, they did this Oprah interview. And if you think about it from the context of Harry and Meghan using the Oprah interview to communicate with the royal family, the question you're left with is, what were they trying to communicate? What was the message they wanted the royal family to hear? Disregard the public temperature. They don't care about that so much. This was a medium for Harry and Meghan to communicate with the royals. What were they trying to say? They most definitely were trying to justify a lot of their bad behaviors. They were trying to make it seem like they were so distressed by the headlines, and the headlines were such a serious and grave problem that they lashed out in weird ways, and that they had struggled in such major ways. They did that big mistake of the South Africa interview of saying, I'm not okay, nobody's asked me if I'm okay. All of this was justified during the Oprah interview because they were trying to communicate to the royals that those mistakes that had upset the royal family and caused problems for the monarchy were because they were suffering from X, Y, and Z, or because such and such happened. Essentially blaming other parties for their poor actions and choices. Very classic narcissistic type of tactic. It wasn't me, it was this people or these problems or these news headlines that made me complain or misbehave or be very, very difficult. They were also trying to communicate to the royal family that their desire was reasonable and that the only reason why they're taking these commercial deals is for security. If only they were able to have the security paid for, they wouldn't have to do these deals. But I don't think anybody believes that they would have turned down those deals if they had security paid for in some other way. Their lack of awareness and social ineptitude really left them incapable of foreseeing the consequences to the severity of their actions, accusations, and statements throughout this interview. For the royals, this was a no way back moment. But leave in the comments what you thought of the interview, what was your opinion on it, and what do you think the true motivations behind it were? It could really be a case study in what not to do. Bad PR and horrible interview presence between Harry and Meghan both. But I'm eager to read the discussion in the comments, and I will probably put out a final comments Q&A. So if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to be featured, then be sure to leave them below for that upcoming video. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video and for this entire Oprah series. I really look forward to putting out that Q&A video after you all have seen the full series, and I appreciate each and every one of you joining me. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye!